The escape. The night was heavy with rain, the kind that muffled footsteps and blurred the world into silver shadows. Alina clutched her baby close to her chest as she ran through the narrow alley, her breath sharp and uneven, her eyes wide with fear. Each raindrop that touched her skin felt like a warning from the heavens, reminding her of how dangerous her decision was. The baby stirred weakly against her shoulder, a small whimper escaping his lips, and she quickly kissed his forehead, whispering, "Shh, my love. Just a little longer. Mama's got you." The cab she had called was waiting near the end of the street, its headlights dimmed, its engine humming low. She opened the door with trembling hands, slid in, and gave the driver an address she had memorized for months. A tiny town 300 miles away, where no one would think to look for her. As the car moved through the sleeping city, Alina watched the glowing towers fade behind her. Those towers had once been her cage, the empire of the man she once loved and now feared most, Dante Moretti. To the world, he was the powerful CEO of an international corporation. But behind that smooth mask was a man with ties to darker things, a man who controlled everything and everyone around him. She had been part of his world once, a secret no one dared to speak of. She was the hidden woman who had captured his heart, and the mother of his child. But the day she saw blood on his hands and silence in his eyes, she realized that love with him would never mean freedom. So she planned her escape in silence, every move calculated, every moment filled with dread that he might discover her intentions before she fled. The baby was the only light that guided her through those sleepless nights. His tiny hands, his innocent breathing reminded her of what she was fighting for. She named him Luca, after her father, a man who had taught her that courage wasn't about not being afraid. It was about protecting what mattered most, even when the fear tried to break you. Tonight, courage was all she had. When the driver stopped at a roadside diner for gas, she didn't dare step out. She stared at the rain through the window, her reflection faintly visible, pale and haunted. For the first time in months, she felt a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she was finally free. But freedom, she would soon learn, has a price. By dawn, the cab rolled into a quiet town nestled between old hills and rivers that caught the morning light like mirrors. The streets were empty except for a few shopkeepers setting out their wares and a milk truck humming past. Alina found a small house for rent, old, creaky, but safe. The landlady was kind and didn't ask too many questions. That night, for the first time in a long time, Alina slept beside her child without fear that a locked door would burst open. She dreamed of starting over. Maybe she'd work in a bakery or a bookstore or anywhere she could keep her baby close. She dreamed of peace. Weeks passed. Life began to feel normal, fragile but precious. Luca grew stronger, his laughter filling the small home with warmth. Alina's hair, once styled to perfection by servants, now fell loosely down her back as she hung clothes to dry. There were moments she caught herself smiling at simple things, the smell of fresh bread, the way the morning sun painted golden lines on the wall, the sound of Luca's soft giggle when she tickled his toes. For those fleeting moments, the world didn't feel cruel. It felt alive again. Yet somewhere deep in her heart, she knew Dante would never truly let go. He was not a man who accepted defeat, especially when it came to what he believed was his. He had searched for her before when she had tried to leave him once, but that time she had returned, thinking it was love that drew her back. Now she knew better. Love was not control. Love was not fear. Then one morning, while she was rocking Luca to sleep, she noticed a black car parked across the street. Her pulse quickened. The man inside wore sunglasses and didn't move for hours. The next day it was there again, same car, same silence. The third day the car was gone, but her heart wouldn't stop racing. She told herself she was being paranoid. She told herself Dante couldn't have found her this fast. But when she went to buy milk, she felt eyes following her. When she returned home, she found the back door unlocked even though she was sure she had latched it. That night she didn't sleep. She sat beside Luca's crib with a knife in her trembling hands, whispering prayers to a God she wasn't sure still listened. 3 nights later, the storm came. The wind howled through the cracks of the old house, rain pounding like drums against the roof. She was pacing the floor when the power went out. Total darkness. The baby began to cry. And then, a sound. Soft, steady footsteps outside. She froze, clutching Luca close. The doorknob turned once, twice, then stopped. She held her breath, her heart slamming against her ribs. Silence. And then a low voice came through the door. Alina. Her blood ran cold. She knew that voice. Smooth, deep, dangerous. Filled with something that was not anger, but something worse. Possession. She backed away slowly, whispering, "Please. Not now, not here." The door creaked open. Lightning flashed, illuminating his silhouette. Tall, broad-shouldered, soaked in rain. His eyes locked on hers, and in that moment she knew the chase was over. Dante Moretti had found her. He stepped inside, the storm framing him like a ghost from her nightmares. His voice was calm, almost tender, but his eyes told another story. "You thought you could run forever?" he said quietly, his gaze falling to the child in her arms. "You took my son," Alina's breath hitched. "He's not your possession, Dante. He's my child, too." Dante's jaw tightened. For a long moment he said nothing. The wind roared outside and the room seemed to shrink around them. Finally he spoke, not in fury, but in a tone that sent a chill through her bones. "You belong to me, Alina, both of you. You always have." Tears filled her eyes, but she refused to break. "No," she whispered. "Not anymore." He took one slow step closer, his hand reaching out, not violently, but like a man haunted by something he couldn't name. "You can't escape what's written in our blood," he murmured. "You're mine. Forever." And as thunder rolled through the night, Alina realized that her fight for freedom had only just begun. The return. The storm had barely faded when Dante's men arrived. 2 dark SUVs pulled up in front of the little house, their engines humming like restrained beasts. Alina stood by the window, her baby in her arms, watching as silhouettes moved through the rain. There was no shouting, no breaking of doors. Everything was silent, precise, and cold, like the way Dante did everything. When he entered the house again, this time under the pale light of dawn, he didn't need to raise his voice. One gesture of his hand and his men stepped aside. "Pack her things," he said, without even looking at them. Alina's voice cracked. "You can't just take me away again, Dante. I'm not yours to order around." He turned his head then, slowly, eyes locking on hers. They were the same eyes that once made her believe in love. Dark, steady, filled with promises that used to mean safety. But now they only spoke of control, of a man who couldn't understand the difference between protecting and possessing. "I already let you go once," he said quietly, almost like a confession, "and it nearly destroyed me." She took a step back. "You didn't let me go. I ran because you gave me no choice," he didn't answer. Instead, he turned his gaze to the baby, sleeping now in her trembling arms. His face softened for a moment and she could see it, the flicker of something real behind that armor. But then it vanished again as quickly as it came. When they finally left the small town, the morning light was weak and gray. Alina sat in the back seat, her baby cradled close, her mind filled with fear and defiance. Dante sat beside her, silent, staring out the window as if the world outside no longer mattered. His presence filled the space between them, heavy and suffocating, yet somehow calm. The calm before a storm that hadn't finished breaking. Hours passed before they reached the estate. It stood on a hill overlooking the sea, vast, cold, and beautiful in a way that made her heart ache. She had lived here once. She knew every room, every marble floor, every echoing corridor where she had once laughed, once dreamed of a future. Now it all felt like a gilded cage. When they entered the main hall, memories came flooding back, her laughter echoing off the high ceilings, the scent of roses that used to fill the rooms, the warmth that once existed before everything turned to shadow. She thought of the night she left, how she'd crept down these same steps with her baby in her arms, heart pounding, terrified that the guards would wake. Now she was being carried back like a prisoner. Dante's voice broke her thoughts. "Your old room has been prepared. You'll stay there until we decide what comes next." "We?" she asked bitterly. "There is no we anymore, Dante. There's just you, and what you want." He stared at her for a long moment, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. "You still think of me as a monster?" Alina swallowed hard. "You've given me no reason to think otherwise." He said nothing after that, only turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing against the marble. When he was gone, one of the housemaids, Maria, an older woman who had always shown Alina kindness, stepped forward and took her gently by the arm. "It's all right, Signora," she whispered. "Things have changed since you left. He's not the same." Alina gave her a weary, hollow smile. "People like him don't change, Maria. They only hide it better." That night, she sat by the window of her old room, the ocean whispering below the cliffs, the stars hidden by heavy clouds. The baby slept peacefully beside her, and she brushed a lock of hair from his tiny face. "I'll protect you," she whispered, "even if it kills me." Downstairs in his study, Dante sat alone. The rain had started again, tapping against the windows like a quiet rhythm of guilt. He poured himself a drink but didn't touch it. His hand lingered over a photograph on the desk. Alina smiling, sunlight caught in her hair, holding their baby in her arms. He closed his eyes, remembering the first time he saw her. The way she had challenged him, unafraid of the rumors, unshaken by his reputation. She had been light, and he had been the shadow that consumed it. When she ran, something inside him broke. He told himself he needed her back to restore order, to fix what had gone wrong. But the truth was darker. He needed her because she was the only thing that ever made him feel human. Yet every time he looked at her, all he knew how to do was control. He didn't know love in any other way. Hours later, when he finally went upstairs, he stopped by her door. It was slightly open, the faint light of a lamp spilling into the corridor. He saw her asleep by the crib, exhaustion painted across her face. For a long moment, he just stood there watching her, the rise and fall of her breathing, the soft sound of the baby's sigh. Something inside him shifted, a quiet ache he couldn't name. He reached out to close the door but paused, his hand hovering midair. "Good night, Alina," he whispered, though she could not hear him. The next morning, Alina woke to the sound of voices downstairs. When she stepped out of the room, she saw two of Dante's men carrying boxes, toys, clothes, everything she had left behind months ago. He had kept it all. It was as if he had known she would return someday. At breakfast, he sat at the head of the table, reading documents, pretending not to notice her. She took the seat opposite him, her chin high, her fear hidden beneath layers of quiet strength. Finally, she broke the silence. "What do you want from me, Dante? Say it, why bring me back here?" He set down the papers, his eyes meeting hers with unsettling calm. "Because I can't lose you again." "You didn't lose me," she said softly. "You drove me away." He looked away, jaw tightening. For the first time, she thought she saw something close to shame in his expression. Then he said, almost to himself, "Maybe this time, I'll do it right." Alina shook her head. "You can't fix what you refuse to understand." But he didn't answer, and she realized he wasn't hearing her words. He was fighting with himself, with the man he had become. As days passed, things inside the estate began to change. He no longer locked her door. He no longer ordered her around. Sometimes she would find fresh flowers in her room, or see him standing quietly in the garden, watching Luca play with an expression she had never seen before. Tenderness, maybe even regret. But she couldn't trust it yet. She had built too many scars to believe in softness again. And still, every night when the sea wind howled through the cliffs, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, there was still a fragment of the man she had once loved hiding behind those cold eyes. The walls began to crack, days turned into weeks, and the rhythm of life inside Dante's mansion began to take on a strange, uncertain calm. The first few mornings, Alina moved like a ghost through the halls, carrying her baby close, expecting at any moment to hear the snap of command in Dante's voice, to feel the weight of invisible chains closing around her again. But the commands never came. Instead, there was a kind of quiet that she didn't trust. His men still watched her, yes, but they kept their distance. The locks on her doors were gone. When she went into the garden, no one stopped her. It was as though the entire house was waiting for something, either her surrender or his. Dante, for his part, seemed changed in ways that unsettled her more than his anger ever had. He no longer tried to control her movements, and when he spoke, it was with an effort that seemed almost painful. Sometimes he appeared at breakfast, reading reports with dark circles under his eyes. Other days, he disappeared for hours, leaving her to wander the estate with the child. One afternoon, she found him in the library, surrounded by open ledgers and untouched coffee. He looked up as she entered, and for a moment his face softened. "He's growing fast," Dante said, glancing at the baby in her arms. "He is," she replied quietly, unwilling to offer more. He gestured toward the empty seat across from him. "Sit, please." She hesitated, then sat, more out of exhaustion than obedience. For a long time, neither spoke. The ticking of the old clock filled the silence between them. Finally, he said, I kept the company running, but it doesn't matter the same way anymore. None of it does. She studied him. What changed? He didn't meet her eyes. You left. For a heartbeat, she almost forgot how to breathe. You think that's an excuse for what you did? For what you became? He looked up then, and there was no anger, only a quiet weariness. No, it's just the truth. Something in the simplicity of that answer unsettled her. She wanted to hate him, to keep that hatred sharp so it could protect her. But every time she saw that flicker of humanity in his face, she felt the old memories pulling at her heart. The laughter they once shared, the nights when he had held her as though the world outside didn't exist. She hated herself for remembering those moments. She hated that she still cared at all. That evening, she found a small wooden horse placed beside the baby's crib. It was carved by hand, a little rough around the edges, the initials DM etched clumsily on the underside. She stared at it for a long time, then set it back down, her mind whirling with questions she didn't want to ask. Later, when she stepped onto the balcony, she saw him again, standing near the edge of the garden watching the sea in silence. For a moment, she simply observed him, the wind tugging at his shirt, the distant thunder muttering across the horizon. He looked nothing like the man who once frightened her. He looked lost. Why are you out here? She asked finally, her voice carrying softly through the night air. He turned slowly. Can't sleep. The storms never used to bother me. They do now. Alina stepped closer, though not too close. You used to love storms. I loved what I thought they meant, he said. Power, control, the sound of something bigger than fear. Now they just sound like everything I've broken. His words lingered in the air, heavy with something she didn't know how to respond to. There was a time she would have taken those words as manipulation, but tonight they felt different, raw, unguarded. He glanced at her, his voice lowering. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I don't even deserve that, but I can try to make this a place where you and Luca are safe. You have my word. She searched his face for deceit, for the familiar hardness that once lived there, but all she saw was exhaustion, the kind that comes when a person has spent too long fighting themselves. Safety isn't a place, Dante, she said quietly. It's what you make of yourself. He nodded slowly as if he understood, though neither of them believed it could be that simple. From that night on, small changes began to ripple through the house. He dismissed some of his men. The dark luxury that filled the mansion began to shift. Vases of fresh flowers replaced cold statues. Warm light filled the hallways. It was as if he was trying to erase the memory of the man he had been. But Alina knew better. Redemption was not a decoration you could hang on the wall. It was a battle you fought every day, and Dante's battle had only begun. Still, her walls began to crack. One morning she found him on the floor of the nursery, building wooden blocks with Luca. The sight stopped her in the doorway. The man who once commanded armies of fear was now laughing softly as her child tried to stack a tower that kept falling. When Dante noticed her watching, he froze for a moment, then smiled faintly. He's stubborn, he said. Like you. Alina didn't answer. She only turned away before he could see the emotion that rose in her eyes. That night, long after Luca had fallen asleep, Alina sat alone by the fire in her room. The flickering light painted golden shadows across the floor. She thought of all the things she wanted to say, all the questions she couldn't ask. Then she heard a quiet knock on the door. Come in, she said. Dante stepped in, holding a folder. I need to show you something. She looked wary. What is it? He placed the folder on the table and opened it. Inside were documents, bank transfers, photographs, reports. This, he said, is what you were running from. Not me. Her eyes narrowed as she scanned the pages. The names were unfamiliar, but the meaning was clear. Someone had been tracking her since the day she left, not just Dante, but others. A rival organization. People who would have used her and the baby to destroy him. Alina looked up slowly. You knew? I found out a month after you disappeared. I had men watching them. When I realized they were getting close, I had no choice but to find you first. He paused. If I hadn't, they would have. She sank back into the chair, her heart pounding. You expect me to thank you for kidnapping me? No, he said quietly. I just wanted you to understand. The truth twisted something inside her. It didn't erase what he'd done, but it made everything far more complicated. When he left the room that night, she didn't call after him. She just sat there staring at the folder, trying to make sense of the man who was once her cage and might now be her shield. Down the hall, Dante paused outside her door, listening to the faint sound of her baby's breathing. For the first time in years, he felt something like peace, but it was fragile, uncertain, and built on the edge of everything he had broken. The shadows close. The sun had begun to burn warmer over the sea, but inside the estate the air was thick with something that didn't belong to daylight. There was a tension, quiet and invisible, that hummed through the walls like static before a storm. Alina could feel it in the way the guards moved, more alert, more watchful. Even Dante's calm had changed. He was sharper again, distant, as if listening for a sound that only he could hear. She noticed the signs first in small things. The security cameras that used to point outward now pointed inward. The gardeners stopped coming without warning. One night, when she walked past his study, she saw the faint glow of his computer screen. Maps, emails, encrypted codes. The old Dante, the one she had run from, was resurfacing. But there was fear in his eyes now, not hunger for control. Something was coming. When she confronted him the next morning, he was standing by the window, his phone pressed to his ear. "Double the watch on the East Road," he said before hanging up. "What's happening?" she demanded. "Why are there armed men outside the house again? You told me we were safe." He turned toward her, his jaw set. "We were until 3 days ago. Someone breached the network. They know where you are." "Who?" He hesitated, and that hesitation told her everything. "The ones you saw in those files," he said finally. "They want leverage over me, and they think you and Luca are it." Alina's pulse spiked. "And you didn't think to tell me sooner?" "I didn't want to scare you," she laughed bitterly. "You think I haven't lived in fear since the day I met you?" He flinched, just barely, but she saw it. The truth of her words hit him like a blade. "I'm trying, Alina," he said quietly. "You may not believe that, but I am." She looked at him for a long moment. "Then stop hiding things from me. If you want me to believe you've changed, start with honesty." Something softened in his face. He nodded slowly. "All right, you'll know everything." That night, when the baby was asleep, he told her about the years before they met, the alliances he'd made to keep his empire alive, the debts that never stayed buried, about how he'd tried to clean it all once she came into his life. But power has a way of refusing to be forgotten. "The people who are coming," he said, "aren't just enemies. They're old ghosts." Alina listened without interrupting. For the first time, she saw the man behind the legend. The boy who had built walls around himself to survive. The man who mistook control for protection, because he didn't know any other way to keep what he loved safe. And though her fear didn't fade, it began to take on a different shape. No longer the fear of him, but of losing him before he ever truly became the man he was meant to be. The following morning, she woke to the sound of raised voices downstairs. 2 of Dante's men were arguing near the entryway, and when they saw her, they fell silent. Dante appeared behind them, his face pale, his eyes darker than she had ever seen. "They've breached the outer gate," he said. The world seemed to tilt. "Where's Luca?" she asked instantly. "In the nursery with Maria. I've stationed 2 guards there. You're staying in this room until I say otherwise." "No." She stepped forward, fire in her eyes. "I'm not hiding while you risk everything alone. He's my son too." Dante stared at her, torn between anger and admiration. "You think I could fight if I didn't know you were safe?" She wanted to argue, but something in his tone silenced her. This wasn't the cold command of the man she once feared. It was the voice of someone standing at the edge of a cliff, ready to fall if it meant saving what he loved. Outside, thunder began to roll, though the sky was still clear. The sea wind slammed against the windows, carrying the faint echo of engines approaching from the valley. The world was holding its breath. Alina gathered Luca into her arms and moved to the far corner of the room. Through the window she could see the gates in the distance, black vehicles lined along the road, shadows spilling out like ink. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might wake the child. Then the gunfire began, short bursts, muffled but unmistakable. The guards shouted orders. Maria fell to her knees, clutching a rosary, whispering prayers under her breath. Alina felt the baby stir, and she pressed him tighter against her, whispering, "It's all right, my love." It's all right. But it wasn't all right. Moments later, Dante burst through the door. His shirt was torn, blood streaked across his arm, his breathing ragged. "We have to move now," Maria gasped. "Where?" "There's a tunnel behind the wine cellar," he said quickly. It leads to the cliffs. A boat's waiting below. Alina stared at him. You planned for this? I planned for everything, he said grimly, then met her eyes. But I didn't plan to lose you again. She wanted to hate him for the secrets, for the life that had dragged her into this chaos. But when she looked at him now, all she saw was the man who had once held her under a sky of city lights and promised her the world. And for the first time, she believed he wasn't promising out of pride but desperation. They ran through the corridors, the sound of gunfire growing louder. The mansion that had once been their prison was now a battlefield. Paintings shattered, glass rained from chandeliers, the smell of smoke filling the air. Dante moved with precision, his hand never leaving hers, his eyes constantly scanning for danger. When they reached the cellar, the hidden door swung open with a low groan. Cold air rushed up from the tunnel below. Dante motioned for Maria to go first with the child. Alina followed, her steps trembling, her heart racing. As they descended into the darkness, Alina heard the echo of boots above them, too many to count. Dante turned, gun in hand, covering their escape. Go, he said firmly. Don't look back, she froze. I'm not leaving you. Alina, no. Her voice cracked with the force of it. You find us. You hear me? You come back. For a moment, the world narrowed to just their eyes, locked together across the flickering shadows. He gave a small, tired smile, the kind that holds both pain and peace. I'll always find you. Then the door above slammed open and she heard shouting. Dante pushed her toward the tunnel's curve. Go! The last thing she saw before the darkness swallowed her was his figure turning toward the light. Gun raised, the sound of chaos roaring behind him. Hours later, the boat reached the far shore. The sky was gray, the sea restless. Maria held Luca close, whispering lullabies through her tears. Alina stood at the edge of the pier, staring back at the horizon where the mansion had once stood like a fortress. Smoke rose faintly in the distance. She didn't know if he was alive. She didn't know if he ever would be again. But in her heart she felt the echo of his words. I'll always find you. She closed her eyes and whispered into the wind. You better. The reckoning. The sea had a way of swallowing memories. Every sunrise that passed over that distant shore blurred the line between yesterday's chaos and today's quiet. Yet for Alina, the silence was not peace. It was a question that had no answer. 3 weeks had passed since the night of the attack. Every morning she woke to the sound of waves crashing outside the small coastal cottage where she and Luca now lived. Every night she sat by the window, waiting for the sound of footsteps that never came. The world believed Dante Moretti was dead. The news had spread across networks. His mansion burned, his empire scattered, his name whispered like a curse. But Alina didn't believe in the finality of headlines. She'd seen the way he fought that night. The fire in his eyes wasn't the kind that surrendered easily. Still, doubt grew like rot. She would rock Luca to sleep and whisper stories about the man who once promised him the world. And sometimes, mid-sentence, her voice would break. Maria, her constant shadow, tried to keep her anchored. He wouldn't want you to wait, she said gently one night. He'd want you to live. Alina stared out at the black horizon. That's the thing, Maria. I can't live without knowing. I can't move on until I'm sure. And so she began to search, quietly, carefully. She reached out to people she thought she'd never see again, Dante's old associates, friends who had disappeared into the cracks of power. Most turned her away in fear. Some sent word back in secret. Finally, one name surfaced again and again, a man called Silvio, one of Dante's most trusted lieutenants. He had vanished after the fire. Rumors said he was in hiding, carrying something important that the world was never meant to see. Alina knew what that meant. Dante had survived, or at least he'd tried to leave something behind. 2 nights later, she stood on the edge of a fog-choked pier, the baby asleep in Maria's arms behind her. A boat approached silently, cutting through the mist like a shadow. A man stepped out, older, thinner, but unmistakably Silvio. He stared at her for a long moment before speaking. You shouldn't have come here, signora. Then why did you answer? She replied softly. He sighed. Because he told me to. Her heart stopped. He's alive? Silvio hesitated. He was, her breath caught. What do you mean was? He made it out that night, Silvio said. But he was hurt badly. They captured him before my men could reach the tunnel. He told me to make sure you and the child got away. After that, he disappeared into their custody. Alina's voice trembled. Who took him? Silvio looked over his shoulder as if the fog itself could be listening. The ones he betrayed to save you. The syndicate he once built his fortune on. They've been dismantling what's left of his empire piece by piece, hunting for the data he stole from them, but they can't find it. Why not? He met her eyes. Because he gave it to me to destroy. And because the only thing they really want is him. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The waves broke against the dock, and in that rhythm, Alina heard something she hadn't felt since the fire. Resolve. Where are they holding him? She asked quietly. Silvio frowned. You can't mean I do. He shook his head. You have a child, Alina. Don't make the same mistake he did. She stepped closer, her voice turning to steel. You don't understand. The only mistake would be leaving him there alone. 2 nights later, under the cover of darkness, she found herself standing before the black walls of an abandoned fortress deep in the hills, one of Dante's old safe houses turned enemy prison. She had help now. Silvio, 2 loyal men, and the ghost of her own fear that had finally burned itself out. Inside, the halls reeked of smoke and silence. They moved like shadows through the corridors until a familiar voice broke the stillness, a hoarse, low sound that cut through the dark like a lifeline. Alina? Her knees nearly gave out. He was there in a small, dim cell, chained, his face bruised but unmistakably alive. His eyes, though tired, lit up the moment they found hers. Dante. He smiled faintly, his lips cracked. I told you I'd always find you. She laughed through her tears. Looks like I found you first. The lock broke under Silvio's blade, and she fell into his arms, feeling the heartbeat she'd thought she'd lost forever. For a long time, neither spoke. The walls could crumble around them, and they wouldn't care. When they finally pulled apart, Dante looked at her, his voice raw. You shouldn't have come. They'll kill us both, she shook her head. Then we'll die together. But I'm done running from your ghosts. Something in his expression broke. Years of guilt, fear, love, shattering into something pure. You were always braver than me, he whispered. Not braver, she said softly. Just done being afraid of loving you. They escaped through fire and gunshots, every step a memory of what they had survived before. By dawn, they reached the cliffs where the sea met the sky again, the same place she had fled weeks before. The boat waited, waves crashing against its hull. Dante turned to her, his hand trembling in hers. If we go, we can't come back. Everything I built will be gone. She looked at him with quiet strength. Then build something new with us. He smiled faintly. You make it sound easy. It's not. But it's real. And for the first time in his life, Dante Moretti, the man who ruled empires, who controlled everything but his own heart, finally chose to let go. They sailed away as the sun rose, painting the sea in gold. The world behind them burned with the weight of the past, but ahead lay something fragile and alive, a second chance. As the wind tangled her hair and the baby stirred softly in her arms, Alina looked at the horizon. Dante stood beside her, his eyes on the light breaking over the water. Do you think they'll come after us again? She asked quietly. He smiled. Let them come. This time I have something worth protecting. And with that, the man who once believed power was everything finally understood. Redemption isn't found in control, but in surrender. For the first time in years, Alina felt her heart steady. The sea stretched out before them, endless and unknown, but it no longer frightened her. Because now, wherever it led, they would face it together. The waves rolled on, carrying their past into the deep, and their future into the light, the end.